Good evening. We are live on YouTube. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me this evening to discuss Andor, One
Good
Way
evening.
Out.
We are live
And we got an
on
echo
YouTube.
because
My
I
name
am
is Joshua
not
Gilliland.
used to doing YouTube Live. I was used to Facebook, but here we go. All right. So we're going to discuss Andor, One Way Out. With me is Thomas Harper, Stephen Tolafield, and Bethany Blanton. No opinions expressed represent any of our employers or the United States government, Department of Defense, California State Bar. I mean, none of that. So this is purely for entertainment. Some lawyers and a lieutenant from the Space Force having a rip-roaring good time discussing Star Wars. And with that, let's dig into what everyone thought of this. Thomas, what was your reaction of One Way Out?
This, in spite of very limited laser blasts and virtually no spaceships, maybe a glimpse of a couple at the end, may have been the best 45 minutes of Star Wars in a long, long time. Quite possibly since Disney took over the franchise. It was just genuinely heart-thumpingly good.
Stephen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I loved it too. I thought the suspense that it created was really moving. I don't think I've really felt that way when I've watched Star Wars before. It was really intense. And the monologues, Uthan and Kino's monologues were outstandingly performed and incredibly well written. It was really fun.
Bethany.
This episode was just incredible. Like, the series so far has built up to this, but this episode really felt like Rogue One from an emotional perspective. The stakes are high. Not everyone makes it out, and it's in many ways both a hopeful and a disturbing episode. But I agree. This is Star Wars TV at its best.
Yeah, I will echo. I think this is one of the best hours of Star Wars ever made. There are 3 Emmy-worthy performances in this episode. So I was stunned because it is some of the best writing, directing, editing, and overall storytelling that Star Wars has ever done. And there's only a handful of aliens in it and spaceships. It is all in a prison or a living room. So it is truly incredible storytelling. And hats off to the entire production team for what they pulled off. That said, there's lots of legal analysis that we touched on with the conditions in the prison, with a prison sentence that would never end. And then we get into what happens when you do a breakout. So there's lots here, and we've all entered notes into our outline. So let's jump in. Who wants to take on prison breaks first? So I will take the first swing. And first, prison breaks are not allowed. The punishment under the federal law, if you're trying to break out of federal penitentiary, it's an additional felony, and you can go to prison for another 5 years. Now, Virginia has its own law when it comes to it, as does all the states in the United States when it comes to prison breaks. And if you were lawfully detained and you try to facilitate the breakout of another person's escape from prison, or in any way aid their escape, or take any forceful steps to instigate that escape, you too are participating in that prison break, and you can be charged with a felony that can carry a sentence of 1 to 5 years in prison. But wait, you might say, can't there be a necessity defense because they realize they're trapped in there forever? And thus that necessitates their need to break out. Well, we don't quite have anything as analogous as a never-ending prison sentence where people are being used by slave labor. But there are states in our country that do recognize the necessity defense for doing a prison break. And there are very specific requirements. And we first learned about this when long ago we covered Luke Cage, the Marvel show on Netflix, on whether or not you could have a prison break. So, first off, states like Texas do recognize the necessity defense for a prison break, and there are elements that need to be met. So let's take a look at the case. And one of the controlling cases is Spakes v. State, 891 SW 2nd 7, pages 9 to 10, Texas App, 1995. So here are the 5 elements. The prisoner is faced with a specific threat of death, forceful sexual attack, or substantial bodily injury in the immediate future. There is no time for a complaint to the authorities, or there exists a history of futile complaints which make any result from such complaints illusory. There is no time or opportunity to resort to the courts. There is no evidence or force or violence used towards prison personnel or other innocent persons in the escape. And 5, the prisoner immediately reports the proper authorities when he has attained a position of safety from the immediate threat. None of that applies. So let's break down the reasons why none of these things apply. And so this just puts us into the category of it's a revolution. We're in rebellion mode now to overthrow the government. That's completely unjust. So is there an immediate threat of death, forceful sexual attack, or substantial bodily injury in the near future? Arguably, no. As long as you are just making the cogs that go into the machine, you're not going to get zapped or tortured or killed. So that's not exactly there. There is no time to, any complaint to the authorities is futile. So that's there. There is no time to resort to the courts. The courts here literally don't care. So dead on delivery. There is no evidence of force or violence used towards prison personnel. Well, that's they do that in spades. So there's a lot. There are dead prison guards and prison officials. And no, they're not reporting to other authorities going like, hey, we just broke out of this torture chamber where they were using us to slave labor to work us to death. So therefore, Your Honor, put us into a prison where I can serve my 6-year sentence for being in the wrong place at the wrong time and looking at a sand trooper the wrong way. So yeah, none of that applies. But Stephen, take it away.
I was just curious. If I were defending Andor, it's hard to argue that there was no violence against any of the guards when he's sort of in typical Cassian Andor fashion, pretty brutally pew-pewed a guard on his way by. But I might say that the specific threat of death or injury, that even though, if they stay in line, they won't get shocked. But that type of kind of intensive, painful physical abuse is, I would argue, is sufficient for them to at least meet that element. But yeah, I'm not sure that there's going to be a good argument for him on any of the other things.
It's interesting because it's the immediacy, like the time requirement, that's the issue here. The motivating factor for those prisoners is the loss of hope. It's this like beautiful connection to the whole Rogue One mentality of rebellions being born on it, or based on it. And the moment that's taken away from the prison population, that's when they decide they've got nothing else to lose. They're going to die there anyways. But that legal requirement is that the death or serious bodily injury be imminent in nature, that it be coming very soon. And that's not the case for them. It's not like seems like the only reason that folks are getting executed is if they find out the secret. And I suppose now that they know, if the Empire found out, that maybe they'd wipe out the prison population there, but that's pretty speculative. So here it sort of fails on that basis. The question of whether you could kind of mold the fact that the whole thing is performative, that the sentence, you're effectively enslaved there. It really, I mean, Cassian or Kino put it pretty bluntly. They said they're making up our prison sentences as they go along. It's ironic that you would have to argue that sort of like lawlessness by the authorities in defense of yourself to the law, like to the court system. But that's not an imminent threat, but it's one in which I think you might be able to craft a pretty powerful mitigation defense. It doesn't excuse wrongful acts, but it pretty well undercuts the sort of wrongfulness of what you've done, or the degree of harm, at least.
Another factor to consider is turning oneself over to authorities. Turning oneself over to the Empire is a death sentence, so that wouldn't make sense. Turning oneself over to another government, that could be whether it's Chantrillin or Alderaan, pick one that has senators who are in the rebellion, who would be friendly to the idea of like, hey, we can offer testimony about everything going down in these labor camps where people are being worked to death and euthanized. That's something that what's left of the government would want to know. Whether or not that would work is unknown. And would those senators be taken out for harboring fugitives at that point? Is that how the planet gets carpet bombed in retaliation for being sympathetic to the 5,000 prisoners that just escaped this labor camp? So it's a tall order.
Interestingly, I don't want to dive down the rabbit hole here because I'm probably going to save it for a written post on the blog. But if Cassian and some of those folks were considered prisoners of war or detainees during an armed conflict, the act of escape, it cannot be the basis for a punishment. They can be subject to disciplinary actions. So you could be made to do extra work around camp or something like that, maybe put on an extra shift or two. But the physical act of escaping alone can't be the basis for like additional punishment. And even if it's a repeat offense, so like think about The Great Escape and Steve McQueen's character is like repeatedly trying to escape. They can't execute you for that sort of thing. They can't beat and torture you. But the exception there is that law only goes so far as to protect you from the act of escape. If you commit crimes in the middle of the escape or during the planning of, so say killing a guard or something like that, those are separate and apart. So the protection only lasts so long. So even if that were the scenario here, Cassian, Kino, and the rest of them would still be in a substantial amount of trouble because of how they had to effectuate it. And that was just necessary for them to get out, but puts them in hot water, even less of an incentive to somehow turn themselves in.
Yeah. And I was going to say too,
I would think that Cassian has a particularly good argument for this, given that this is not the only rebel-like behavior that he's engaged in. So he can say, I am a soldier for the resistance, or I am a lawful, like, maybe not military per se at this point, but I'm a lawful combatant, essentially. Because that would be my defense in his shoes. So not that it will work with the Empire, but
So what is it that Luthen says? They're going to hang you at the same rope.
So I'll share a family story where an ancestor made case law in Texas twice. So Lorenzo Gilliland got into a gunfight over a watermelon where he shot a guy on horseback. claimed self-defense, was convicted and sentenced to hard labor in Texas in the 1870s. His wife petitioned not one, but two governors for a pardon. The first governor, Koch, prepared the pardon. The US senator from Texas died. The governor appointed himself senator, didn't sign the pardon before doing so. Lieutenant governor becomes governor, comes in, signs the pardon, and sends it to the prison. Lorenzo Gilliland was tired of waiting and escaped the day the pardon arrived and spent 10 years on the run in California, slowly losing his mind, ending up in a sanitarium because he was on the run from the law and turning into a devout racist at the same time. He eventually goes back to Texas, where he's arrested for the act of escaping from the prison. The judge threw out the case because he had an unconditional pardon that was effective when signed. So as soon as the second governor signed the pardon, he would have been released from prison immediately if that had been sent to, if he had known about it. So he escaped from prison being a free man. Therefore, the crime of escape didn't attach to him.
Did you ever pitch this to the Coen brothers?
Yeah, right.
Sounds like a great story.
Oh, it's bonkers, because this, by the time that the Chinese Exclusion Act rolls around and becomes law, he is nuts, walking around talking to himself. And since he's living in Texas, naturally they make him a marshal, and he goes to this town claiming that they're an evil Chinese gang doing nefarious conduct. The local sheriff ends up shooting and killing him. Because again, nothing like law on law violence, because you had this nut job walking around saying, I'm after these horrible individuals. So again, he turned into a horrible human being. Great-great-grandma apparently didn't tell her son all the insane things about his biological dad. He just knew his stepdad because he was born while dad was in prison. Great-grandpa would go on to become the first elected sheriff of Ventura, California. So it apparently then skipped a generation, hearing all these stories, and thus became an actual lawman compared to great-great-grandpa, who was just bonkers, but highlights a couple of interesting case law issues that applies to abandoning a marriage, which went to the Texas Supreme Court, and escaping from a prison after you've been pardoned.
Does your family still have a sensitive relationship with watermelons, since that apparently got all this started?
Yeah, no, we don't. No, we don't.
That's good. I wouldn't want to hold it against that delicious fruit.
I mean, they are pretty tasty. But yeah, he made saddles, and it went downhill. So, but again, there we go. So there are some lessons I can apply to Andor from this, that you can get punished for the escape unless you've already been pardoned for being in prison for the first place. So
Seems like also there might be some additional exposure for conspiracy, because even though you're helping each other, part of the crime is doing the helping each other get out. I was looking really quickly, and it seems like conspiracy doesn't merge with that crime. You can be charged separately. Also, the felony murder for all the people who were injured during the course of that breakout, also exposure. There's a lot going on there for Cassian.
In for a penny, in for a pound.
yeah, it's intense, and this is the bulk of the episode, and there's a handful of legal issues associated with it. We have the floor operators, the main technicians that get held at gunpoint, one summarily executed. Felony murder, there's, like that's murder. Shot a dude, cold blood. They're escaping. So there's some legally problematic conduct by the heroes, but they're going up against the Empire, and they are no angels in this story. So there's a lot there. A lot there. Any other comments to add on the prison break? So the second gut punch of the episode, that I can't swim, is one heck of a way to end this, and kind of initially overshadows the gut punch that happens a little earlier, where Mon Mothma is asked to betroth her daughter to cover a transaction fee for 400,000 credits. That's not good. And, again, Emmy-worthy performance, because she is horrified at this prospect. They're not asking for an engagement, but I want to introduce my son to your daughter because they're both going to be of age. That custom of marrying off 15-year-olds would only be illegal in 2 US states. New Jersey and Delaware are the only 2 that have banned child marriages. So anyone under 18 can't get married in those states. There's a push in California to pass a law, and that's on its complex journey. But I was actually horrified by this because this is a huge surprise. I thought all of them would not be okay with child marriages. The fact it's 2 out of 50 is insane. Now, California's law on marriages for people under 18 requires consent of a parent and the judge saying that there isn't any duress or anything. And this gets into California Family Code sections 302, 303, and 304. And 302 is an unmarried person under 18 years of age may be issued a marriage license upon obtaining a court order granting permission to the underage person or persons to marry in accordance with the requirements described in section 304. Stopping off at 303 first, because let's look at everything. If it appears to the satisfaction of the court by application of a minor, and that the minor requires a written consent to marry, and that the minor has no parent or has no parent capable of consenting, the court may make an order consenting to the issuance of a marriage license granting permission to the minor to marry in accordance with the requirements of section 304. Well, what does 304 say? And determining whether to issue a court order granting permission to marry pursuant to 302 and 303, the court shall do the following: require family court services to separately interview the parties intending to marry, and if applicable, at least one of the parents or the guardians of each party who is a minor. If more than one parent or guardian is interviewed, the parents or guardians shall be interviewed separately. They require family court services to prepare and submit to the court a written report containing any finding of potential force, threat, persuasion, fraud, coercion, or duress by either of the parties or the family members relating to the intended marriage. The report also shall contain recommendations of family court services for either granting or denying the parties permission to marry. If family court services knows or reasonably suspects that either party is a victim of child abuse or neglect, family court services shall submit a report of the known or suspected child abuse or neglect to the Child County Protective Service Agency. After reviewing the report and the findings of the family court, as described above, separately interview in camera each parties to prior to making a final determination regarding the court order. Consider whether there is evidence of coercion or undue influence on the minor. If the court issues an order granting parties permission to marry pursuant to sections 302 or 303, and if one of both parties are 17 years of age or younger, the party shall be eligible to request a marriage license no earlier than 30 days from the time the court order was granted. Whew. So it goes on from there. But the fact this exists shocked me. And apparently each state in the union has different requirements for people under the age of 18 to get married. There have been horror stories about child marriages and kind of the religious influence that happens in some cultures, and the fact that this is allowed to continue, and the advocacy groups that are fighting it is a worthy fight to join. Anyone else want to pile in on underage arranged marriages?
I mean, it's, I suppose, heartening. If you're not going to ban it, then at least layer on as many protections as you possibly can to try to guard against the wrong kind of underage marriage, if there is one. I mean, they're trying to, I suppose, create a system in which folks can legitimize a relationship like that with appropriate consent and buy-in from parents and that sort of stuff. But you can see the problems with it here, because if this all gets lined up, and say Coruscant has this type of law in place, you can imagine everybody playing the part, right? You can imagine them sitting down and saying what they need to say. How deeply are the courts there on Coruscant as busy as they are looking into these things? These are presumably very well-known people, like who would question them having any ulterior motives. That's sort of like the gangster here knows all of these things. He knows that this won't get questioned, and he knows that this is a great way to get his hooks in long term, as opposed to just earning one favor or one fee off of this thing. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity with someone like Mon Mothma, and what better way to do it than through marriage? And presumably, I mean, he sort of alludes to the fact that they'll set circumstances or conditions that the children will want to be together anyhow. I mean, we don't know anything about his son, but he alludes to the fact that they'll put them together, and kids will do what kids do, right? Or teenagers, I suppose. And so I think it's a very shrewd way to play the game, but that makes it that much more horrifying from Mon Mothma's part. I mean, that her like just sort of silently shaking as he walks out the door and calls out her lie that she's not actually thinking of it is just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
go ahead.
devil's advocate, but maybe he's better than Perrin as a father. Like purely devil's advocate. I wonder what has always frustrated me about US law around marriage, having spent some time living in Tennessee, where I saw people as young as 15 getting married. That's not uncommon. Even younger also happens sometimes. It's just like, you don't trust these people to vote. In some cases, like, you can send people off to war before they can drink. It's, if you have to have parental permission, how is that person capable of consenting, right? So there's just so many problems around it. And I wonder, within this universe, is Mon Mothma's daughter old enough to vote?
Mon Mothma was apparently ready to be a senator at 15, wasn't she?
Yeah, and married off at 15. So
Yeah. So fictional. But
yeah, so there's a lot of weird things happening.
yeah.
First off, how do their elections work? Are the senators just appointed for life? Does it vary on the customs of the local planet, whether they're appointed or elected? That's a huge mystery. The fact that she's been in office since she was 15 hints to there is not elections taking place. That this is like a federal lifetime appointment to the bench, which is alien to us. And we would not appoint a 15-year-old to go serve in Congress because they're 15. When we change the Constitution, because we can do that through amendments, to say, hey, if you are able to go fight for our country, you should be able to vote in it. So we, passed a constitutional amendment so 18-year-olds can vote. To the
You could
chagrin
still
of-
join the military even younger with parental consent. So
Yes. Yeah. 17. But again, you can be too young to hero. And you can, and again, people did get in trouble for joining too young and faking, birth certificates. This happened in World War II with people who were too young to join who wanted to do their part. Appreciate that, but we can't have 15-year-old soldiers. The idea of 15-year-old brides and grooms is mortifying to me. And I didn't grow up in a place where that happened. So the fact that it exists and Star Wars is talking about it, hopefully people will continue to talk about it here. So it's not just, John Oliver and other, exposés highlighting child marriages happen. Because that's, again, there are 25-year-olds still living at home. The idea of, a 15-year-old getting married is bonkers. Where would Mon Mothma's teenage daughter and teenage son live? What would they do for jobs? How does higher education work? It's bonkers. So,
maybe, and this could be me being wildly optimistic or naively optimistic, maybe in their culture there's something where essentially you get legally married, but it's more like a promise pact, if you will, and you don't actually like move in together or fulfill married life or anything like that until you are older. But given the level of responsibility that was placed on Mon Mothma at such a young age, or even when you think about Queen Amidala, like how young she was when she became queen, or like how young Leia was as a senator, it seems like an undue amount of adult responsibility is placed on teenagers.
yeah, because under our laws, you have to be 25 to be elected to the House of Representatives, 30 to be a senator, 35 to be president, because we want people with life experiences to serve in those offices. Now, you do get stories of city council members electing college students, that sort of thing does happen, but you want people who are capable of making decisions. The Star Wars idea of seeing a teen in an elected office or appointed highlights wish fulfillment that teenagers are smart. I do volunteer work with teenagers. They are smart. They are like people, just like you and me, with hopes and dreams, but they're still learning. They want to be able to branch out. They want to be able to have emancipation from home, but they still want a safety net to be able to look over their shoulder and go like, hey, how does this work? They're skipping all of that in the Star Wars story, or at least that planet is skipping it. So, from Vader thinking Luke is still a boy in Empire Strikes Back, and he's 19, 20 at that point. So to marrying off 15-year-olds is just so mind-numbing. The fact that it plausibly would be legal in 48 states is also shocking.
Because it's not even necessarily about intellect. They haven't emotionally matured. They haven't physically matured. Like, you're still physically growing. Your brain is still developing. I have issues and questions.
The
And that-
Jedi Order is like, whoa, 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 you can't marry, but you can. Here's a clone battalion. Go fight.
Right. You can go to war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Child soldiers are also a problem. So, like, yeah, it's one thing if you're out of people, which is brilliantly explored in Gundam, but this is bonkers. Like, people change. The example, Alan Tipper Gore got divorced, and that would highlighted that people who marry young, sometimes as they grow and get much older, after being vice president of the United States, they got divorced. Tragic. Like, they went through so much together, but they became different people over time. That happens. So the idea of trying to marry off a 15-year-old, like, in my late 40s, I'm very different than I was as a teenager.
And I think we see that in Mothma's reaction, because she's so unhappy with her home life, and you could see that she just wishes she hadn't been betrothed to Perrin, and she regrets so much of her life when it comes to her family, and that's obviously what's kind of playing under the surface, her desire to avoid that for her own daughter.
How did Belle avoid it? You just say no.
Yeah, I mean, because Perrin doesn't seem to realize that she's not straight, because he keeps asking, or he asked at dinner if she found a husband yet. So,
Not at all rude. So
Yeah.
and Mon Mothma's reaction in the background to that comment is hilarious. She's like, rolls her eyes. It's really funny.
all the good ones are taken. Rock on. Like, ready, aim, fire. So but yeah, there's a lot of uncomfortable. This scene's a gut punch, absolute gut punch. And then we have the rest of the prison break, and we find out that there's an inside man at the ISB. And Stephen, were you the one who explored Lonnie's and Luthen?
Yeah, it just struck me that I was thinking in terms of extortion or blackmail, first in terms of Mon Mothma, and whether she was setting herself to be blackmailed by talking to the shady banker. But then it occurred to me that, of course, Luthen is just blackmailing Lonnie. Then the California Penal Code defines extortion as the obtaining of consideration from another with that person's consent, induced by the wrongful use of force or fear. And consideration means anything of value. So the intelligence that Lonnie is providing is of great value to Luthen. And so Luthen also makes comments about, like, hey, how's that daughter of yours doing? And, your career has greatly profited from the information we provided. And California case law is really clear that threats don't have to be blatant. They don't have to be spoken. The jury can infer a threat that can satisfy the definition of extortion based on the context and the relationship of the people. Because, of course, the defendants are usually smart enough not to say, if you don't do this thing, I'm going to do this. They will usually veil their threats in some way. So it seems pretty clear that Luthen he's committing extortion. He's blackmailing Lonnie to keep him in that position that he needs him in. But as we heard in that really powerful monologue, Luthen said, or maybe the dialogue leading up to it, Luthen says, there's no pleasure in saying it, but you're stuck, you're trapped. I have you under my thumb and there's nothing you can do about it. So sorry, you're going to have to stay in the most dangerous position in the universe.
It's punishment enough for that mustache. Lonnie.
It is so 1970s.
And the haircut.
Perfect. It's perfect.
So 70s.
It
No
it
notes.
is. We had a long discussion earlier in the season about Mon Mothma and like seditious conspiracy and stuff. I think here you've got a really, really well sketched out case for one, because in particular, Luthen mentions that they took an oath, and that suggests that Lonnie struck a deal that's beyond just, hey, I need some information to advance my career. I'll occasionally drop you some things if you can help me out along the way. It's pretty clear from their conversation that Lonnie had sort of aims and desires to assist the rebellion. Like, he knows what he's in for. It's two people who have conspired to overthrow by force the government here. So he is very aware of what's happening. It's the textbook definition out of the U.S. Code for a seditious conspiracy, and it's even more well defined than what Mon Mothma's involved in. We talked about the financial aspects and some of those angles with her, but what was very clear was she was, as much as she was tied into Luthen in some things, she was very much kept on the periphery about certain operations, the way that they compartmentalize information. She was in the dark on a number of things. Here, 6 years he's been at this. Lonnie has, he says, working his way up, feeding information, getting information in exchange so that he can elevate himself and, in reality, get access to better information for the rebellion. And that's a prime target. I mean, the ISB doesn't seem to realize that they have a mole at this point. And he's on top of all this, he's trying to hand over an ISB agent at the same time, someone who's sort of a clear and present danger to this, to Luthen's cell. So I don't think he realizes that he's painted the target on his own back bright red. It hasn't really required Luthen to do much of anything. The threatening his daughter is just sort of insult to injury at this point.
Agreed. So Deidre doesn't say anything in this episode. When Lonnie suggests they do their normal plan of action to not raise suspicion, she looks irritated and does a 180 and walks out of the conference room. Is she following Lonnie? Is she making him a target now? Is there any reason he needs to be afraid of her and backstabbing? Or was she just going off in a huff? I don't know which direction that's going to play out, but there's, if any one of you want to tag in on that. And why don't we start with Bethany as the intelligence officer for your thoughts on how that meeting went down.
So I read that scene slightly differently from Deidre's perspective, at least, because Lonnie makes a very sound point. So I took Deidre basically like storming out as like, that's a really good point. We have permission to do that. We're going to do that. So she just went to execute, because again, they're trying to find the rebels, so they don't want to tip off their hand too quickly. And so that's a pretty sound decision. If there's some underlying frustration there, I would take that almost, given how competitive the Imperials are and how rank focused the ISB especially is, I could see her being frustrated that an underling kind of came up with the idea and stated it as a, this is what should be done, like more of a statement as opposed to a like, I have a suggestion or something a little less like, because he kind of throws himself out there in a very dog eat dog situation. So it's a good idea. Hopefully Deidre hasn't bought so far into the ISB way of things that she's like, oh hell, he's shining too brightly, better smudge him up a bit, or hopefully she recognizes potential and acts on that. But we've seen how cold and manipulative she is at this point and how callous she is. So I would be terrified if I were in his shoes, because at this point because he's trying to back out of what Luthen wanted him to do, and because he's already betrayed the ISB and the Empire, he's kind of screwed. So something that the government wants in its employees who have like government positions, military, AGS civilians, especially if you have clearances or you hold positions of power, you should not be easily blackmailable. And a part of that is being trustworthy. So the point where it like Lonnie is a traitor to the Empire, but is also trying to back out of what Luthen is holding him to. So neither the Imperials nor Luthen are ever going to see him as trustworthy from this point onwards, which means neither of them are going to like care about him in any way, shape, or form. And then additionally, whether it's Mon Mothma and the banking criminal, whether it's Luthen and all of the steps that he's taken, a lot of these risks that are being taken that make each of these characters susceptible to blackmail or to conspiracy charges or to being charged with criminal activities makes them risky. It's like in the government, you're supposed to have your finances are supposed to be in order. You're not supposed to be like if you're doing things that you could be blackmailed for, that's considered risky behavior that could get your clearance revoked or could get your situation or your job revoked, depending upon the circumstances. So yeah, it's a both our good guys and our bad guys here have so deeply walked themselves into such questionable situations that in normal times they would all be looked at as untrustworthy government employees, essentially. But yeah, Lonnie, by not deciding to just stick with Luthen, I'm not optimistic about his safety and future on either side. I mean, you saw Luthen's response to, well, those 50 people, they're going to have to die for the sake of the rebellion. And from a cold, purely tactical sense, it actually does make sense. But that's a horrifying decision to make as a leader, and it's not something that's not a great way to cultivate hope in the rebellion either. So
yeah, there has to be World War II comparisons to when we figured out Enigma or the Japanese coding system, because eventually both were broken. Did we make any sacrifice plays? And I don't know. It was a long war, but there are examples of counter-espionage that took place. There was the man with no name, that a corpse that was used as a decoy to show a fake planned invasion to get all the German forces good to go to another location. That's going to be depicted in a new movie soon. So there are examples of that. But yeah, I get him wanting to tell Luthen about it's a trap, but he needs to keep his head down going forward, so he doesn't get on anyone's radar. Just keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. It'd be interesting. It will be interesting to see if he lives, because eventually he could just migrate over to the rebellion quietly in the middle of the night with his family. So he's on Yavin doing his work instead. Or, because again, there's time has to play out. Or does he get, taken out behind the barn and shot? It's a new character we get to worry about. The fact that Luthen has somebody on the inside is pretty incredible. So, but yeah, he has some serious treason problems with the scariest people in the galaxy.
Yeah, and
Steven-
it's
Oh, go.
it's the ISB. They are open about who they are, so they are expected to engage in intelligence gathering activities, and they're given really broad ranges with which to do so. So being an actual, from the Empire's perspective, all of their intelligence gathering activities are above board, lawful. They don't need spies. They're not even considering at this point trying to like implant spies within this nascent rebellion. So what Lonnie is doing is incredibly dangerous and is unlikely to be condoned by either side in the long run, especially because he's trying to back out of his agreement with Luthen right now. But yeah, continue, Stephen.
I was just gonna say, when it came to Dedra, that first time I watched it, I got from her that she was just kind of annoyed that someone had sort of usurped her kind of idea, and that he had made a recommendation that she hadn't occurred to her, so she was kind of mad. But the second time I watched it, I got more of a sense that she was that she'd perceived something, that that there was a red flag. And I'm wondering if in the next episode they'll reveal what how something he said or his recommendation tripped her spidey senses in some way, because we know that she's super perceptive. She can perceive patterns in ways that other people are not able to see. And so I'm wondering if she has if Lonnie has somehow unwittingly outed himself to her and she's now on his trail. That'd be interesting to see.
Well, he made physical sort of indications of his nefarious activities. He sprayed some symbol and broke a railing. Presumably that was him. So the pieces are certainly out there, and we see a bit from Ferrix that I think we see an undercover ISB agent watching over things on that planet. And so it's absolutely conceivable that the ISB has counterintelligence agents watching their own people. I mean, it's absolutely happening. We just don't know whether Lonnie is one of those targets. Lonnie is also interestingly positioned. There's this snippet earlier in the season where it's one of the first times we see a briefing in the ISB, and he makes this comment about having made requests for additional protection to traffic going to the Abrion sector where Scarif is. And so he may also be uniquely positioned close into the Death Star project, and or just that facility in general, which is so important to Imperial data operations. So he just doesn't strike me. He doesn't have the face of somebody who's going to stay around for a long time. I hate to say that. He looks like to bring Star Trek and in and cross the streams here. He looks like a red shirter, like a very maybe a well-intentioned red shirter, but
Yeah.
I don't know that we're going to see Lonnie in season 2.
Yeah, he looks like someone who's working at a computer terminal on Yavin.
Yeah.
And so that's my vibe on him.
You know who's going to
but
bring him down? You know, his sad downfall is going to come at the hands of Cyril. That's going to be Cyril's way back into
Oh God, that
the
would be
good
horrid.
graces. But
Cyril will like see his mustache and put 2 and 2 together, because he's the only like ISB person that's trying to rock the Top Gun Maverick look.
So he would know if they have counterintelligence assets. You know, he's been around long enough, and he's also a supervisor. He would know if there's counterintelligence assets. So he should be in a good position to avoid counterintelligence assets.
maybe.
Yeah, but again, the question then is, did he do anything out of character that raised a red flag? Because again, Deidre's reaction, or Dedra, or I'm not sure the correct pronunciation, was her reaction one of, I'm annoyed at you, I'm onto you, I'm angry at you and thus leaving the room. Like, it could be any one of those three.
Or all of them.
Yeah, or all of them.
Yeah.
Like, has he volunteered anything useful before? And
Not
and
that,
that
strongly. So it's definitely a change in his characterization so far from what we've seen on screen. And that may just be enough for her to be like, interesting. I'm going to pay attention to this person because one, that is a smart idea. And two, if he's this deeply thinking about what our adversaries are thinking, like, why is he thinking that much when he hasn't done that before?
But did he get smacked down by Pendergast or whatever the commander's name is? Or was he just kind of under the radar in that briefing that we saw? Because if he was one of the few that didn't get kind of chastised, maybe he's viewed as effective in some way. It's also interesting, was she going to recommend the same thing? That, because if she, and maybe she was again upset that he outdrew me and thus was leaving in a huff. I don't know. And we have multiple options, and all of them are plausible that she's tailing him, which again would be weird because that's also stalkery. But is she tailing a fellow supervisor at this point in time, or is she back at her office analyzing data, coming up with her own plan, and is she looking at all the stuff that he's done? I don't know, but he hasn't reached out to Luthen in over a year. So like, that's the other factor, that if he's in so deep, but he hasn't been passing out information. So I don't know. So any other thoughts on this episode? There were 3 or 4 big legal issues, and that was it.
Can we start a GoFundMe for some, either a life preserver for Kino or some swimming lessons? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe too late.
So hard.
Just his dejected look as everybody's pushing past them to dive off. Oof.
When he said one way out, he knew that one way out did not include him. And that's part of the gut punch for this episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really, really hard and subtle. Like, it's not over the top. Part of the fact that this show is effective is like, we're not seeing Michael Bay explosions. Like, they didn't blow up and sink the prison. Like, they shut it down and they're all jumping to swim Lord knows how far to get to safety. That's very different than, there's a giant explosion at the end of each episode. So the subtlety is part of the mystique of the story.
It is. And he actually, to your point, he states earlier in the episode that basically he's considering himself as already dead. And maybe he really knows that is the case.
Yeah. At the same time, he was, as he took control of the on-program speaker, he was telling people, like, if you see someone falling behind, if you see someone who's confused, you grab them and you get them out and you take them with you. So, but the last time we see him, he's kind of being buffeted by people as they're running past. So maybe someone like helped him, or like jumped on with
maybe
him,
so.
or, so who knows? But I really admire how this series, with it, the way it had like characters kind of come in and out in ways that are really realistic and not very it's not very conventional in terms of storytelling, because one moment a person is there and another moment they're just gone, and you just never quite know what happened to them, and it sort of kind of captures those chance meetings that happen kind of in real life in ways that are really powerful.
Yeah.
A lot of guys got shot trying to escape. and that we had seen for a while. They might not have had names, but a lot of guys get,
Mhm.
picked off by the sharpshooters. Like, that's phenomenal. Not everyone makes it.
Yeah, it's very powerfully unsentimental. Like no one has time to have like a big monologue about, oh, I'll always remember you. I can tell my family I love
Yeah.
them. Like
Yeah.
it's just things come and go and they stop, and it's very, very lifelike in a weird way.
Yeah, it's just, people can have stupid deaths where there's no closure. They're just dead.
The most powerful scene to me, almost in the entire episode, was just the brief moment where you see the 8 or 9 Imperials cowering, sealed up in a room, and one is shushing the others as they just watch all the prisoners run by. And it's the first moment in 10 episodes where you see any sliver of weakness from the Empire, and it's amazing how it managed to turn some of the tropes about Imperial troops and sort of the lower level folks in their ranks completely on its head. And even those guards were menacing up to that point, and then suddenly they're the ones hiding for their lives. I thought that was incredible, and that was 2 seconds of footage, 3.
It's
Yeah.
5,000 angry prisoners trying to get out, and there's 3 dozen guards at best. Like, you're going to, sure, you might shoot 5 or 6, maybe, before the mob gets you. So yeah, incredible storytelling. Now, what the long-term plan is, how to escape when you're in pajamas, like, there's some hard questions there of how are they going to get off said planet? And if there are, I don't know, say 3,000 made it to shore, that's still a lot of guys that you can spot. And how many of them get recaptured? Is the Empire completely on its heels and they don't realize for X amount of time? It looked like they had search aircraft flying on the final shots. So, theoretically they're recapturing people. But I do hope that Kino made it out and that he ends up in the rebellion, because it'd be nice to see him again. And again, plenty of room on Yavin 5 for, mid-level management who's really good at getting stuff done. So,
A Rebel story
Yeah.
coming soon to a Marvel comic near you.
Yes.
I'll pre-order.
Yeah.
yeah, make it a one shot. It's just,
Hmm.
we'll read it. So with that, there was a lot here, and we're coming up on the final 2 episodes, so we'll see how it goes, what's in store for us in the next 2 weeks. But until then, everyone, wherever you listen, please leave a review. We want to thank our Patreon subscriber, Astro Kangaroo. Thank you for being here. And for anyone else, regardless of where you are, stay safe, stay healthy,